We've got a great set of folks already here. I know there's going to be more that flow in. So I'm just going to get things started and I'm going to quickly turn it over. But I'm Bobby Lauer. I'm the president of Campus Compact. I appreciate you signing in and joining us today on this Friday. Here in the Northeast, at least it has been, and I know also our colleagues along the entire East Coast and Nashville in particular has been hit hard. It's been a wild week. I have 4 kids in my house right now, virtual learning, 2 sitting on a counter very close to me making cotton candy. So it has been that kind of week, I know, for many of us as working parents. So just a lot of appreciation and grace and empathy for all of us that are in it together. But I'm really excited for today. I get the benefit and the joy of getting to spend lots of time with Dr. Ashley Finley, who is our main speaker and presenter today. And Ashley is the Vice President for Research and Senior Advisor to the President at AAC&U. She is here today presenting as a part of the series that we're doing with Campus Compact members around informing practice and storytelling, really helping to unleash and look at the really best and most interesting data that's coming out of the field from a variety of places that all ultimately, I think, help make the case of why civic and community engagement is so critical, and thinking about how we can leverage these stories and this data to help both tell our story internally, but make the case also as a sector. Today, Ashley is going to be presenting on the new report that she has authored and just released out of AAC&U called The Agility Imperative: How Employers View Preparation for an Uncertain Future. I was so excited as soon as I saw some of the data coming out for this that I know Ashley also was really excited to see, that really makes the case for the work that our members at Campus Compact are so committed to doing and all of you are leading. Very quick logistic. Ashley is going to present for about 30 minutes. And then we will have the last 15 minutes for Q&A. I want to go ahead and get questions coming as we move so that we can try to get to as many as we can. You can send them to me directly if you'd rather be anonymous, or you can just throw them in chat, and then I'll be moderating Q&A at the end. And with that, I turn it over to you, Ashley. And for those wondering, Ashley's background is real. This is not a virtual background. This is what those of us that work with her are forced to look at every time.
I am lucky to be up here in the mountains, and it can even go higher in terms of elevation than I am now at about 9,000 feet. I have tried to present at about 10,000 feet, and I can tell you it's a thing. It's actually a thing. So I've gotten better. Wonderful to be with you. Truly just so excited for this conversation. So grateful to Bobby and Campus Compact team for just giving the space for this conversation. I talk a lot about our employer findings. We've been running employer reports at AAC&U for almost 20 years, just about 20 years. I feel like, and I don't know that we were trying to make this exact case, but I think this is our strongest case yet to address, I can move my slides here, to address what we think would say are false tensions between what is one's civic identity and what is their professional identity. What necessarily are civic skills, and how are those aligned with and related to professional skills? I think we pretty consistently set up what, and I think Barbie would agree, what we set up as a false binary for students, a false choice between the two. And I would guess, I'm going to hazard to guess that in our lives and the work that we do every day, we hear some version of this tension. And it's always striking to me when I see it laid bare, as I saw in this article not too long ago in the Chicago Tribune, this op-ed. And I'm guessing I've heard some version of this. You shouldn't have to go to college to get a good job or to share in the bounty of America. But everyone who goes to college should have to prepare for the only job that all of us share, being a citizen. That used to be the main reason for higher education. We need to make it so again. And I want to be clear, I'm not quibbling with that sentiment. I'm quibbling with the idea that we are putting that in contrast, in a direct binary, as an oppositional force to how we might consider those skills and those abilities together. And so really what I'd like to do is do a little bit of case making up top before I dip into the data a little bit. On that title slide that I realize now I went too quickly by, there is a QR code that somehow magically, and I generally can't tell you how, is going to take you to the report. I believe that's the case. You will see it again at the end of the presentation as well. So So when talked about the employer report, I started doing this, I think, with our last two reports and back in 2021 and going into 23. I started trying to invite people into a conversation just in sort of what we know about career readiness in terms of just, I'd ask the audience, but I'd love to do that now, but maybe we can come back to it at the end. But I'd ask the audience, take these pictures. What do these things have in common? And marine heat waves, just step a little outside my disciplinary zone here, but marine heat waves are an abnormal rise in sea temperature relative to the air temperature, uh, believed to be caused by climate change. And I get a bunch of comments, and over time I realized that these didn't even encapsulate what I was really going for here. So I started adding more of like, okay, let's add more pictures of what's happening here. And I can tell you, just spoiler alert, the reason I chose these things is because they are things that didn't exist 10 years ago, now about 10 to 15 years ago, simply didn't exist, simply didn't enter the consciousness. Threads of them, yes, absolutely. But the exact things, not so much. So what does it mean to prepare students for a world in which problems and solutions, complexities do not yet exist? That's the framing. The reason I'm lifting this up specifically in this conversation is I cannot tell you the number of times when you open this up in a space of just saying, tell me what these pictures have in common. The idea that each and every one of these things lifts up a kind of civic, community, ethical complexity of how we are not just entertaining new things in our world, but how we are grappling with the social implications of those things, how they complicate our shared space within communities, how they challenge us to think through the ethical implications of what it means to work and engage in these things. In prepping for this session, I showed this slide to my 7-year-old son, and he immediately said, not all those things are good. Some of those are bad things. Yeah, yeah. And yet they exist because we actually think they're doing good too. So to wrestle with that kind of complexity really involves in ways that we might think just as much about problem solving, critical thinking, communication, also pretty complex ideas around civic mindedness, ethical reasoning, moral complexity, and certainly a shared sense of belonging and space. And so what's interesting about this phenomenon, again, in just a little bit of context setting here, it's actually kind of new. The idea that we are separating how we hold in our heads the space for what are civic skills and what are professional skills. I'm going to take you back to pick out my slides here. Take you back to the Moral Act, and I get to show one of my favorite Nebraska artists, Ann Burkholder, in representing this. But this is actually language from the Moral Act, 1862. And that the money so invested shall constitute a perpetual fund to the endowment, support, and maintenance of at least one college, where the leading object shall be to teach learning related to agriculture and the mechanical arts, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions of life. Stretching back in even this part of history, very clear that learning was both intended to free the mind and to create practical applications for that understanding and that ability. Not just that one. The Truman Commission report, 1947, a document we lift up all the time to talk about how higher education leaned into democratic engagement, the creation of the community colleges, some of the best language about really tying together beautifully the idea of what is a public good and what is a private good. All too often, the benefits of education have been sought and used for personal and private profit to the neglect of public and social service. Yet individual freedom entails communal responsibility. The democratic way of life can endure only as private careers and social obligations are made to mesh, as personal ambition is reconciled with public responsibility. a beautiful sort of representation of what it means to not create binaries, to think of this as a fluid continuum of how students learn. And it's, if there's any history buffs in the room, it's probably not a surprise that actually the commission report got this right. You're coming off a time of extraordinary reliance on both the American workforce and its objectives at the time. If you don't know anything about the Liberty ships and FDR's charge to the American workers to build Liberty ships faster than German submarines could sink them, look up that story. It's an incredible example of economic thriving and economic capability bound by a civic effort. It's just one of the best examples out there. So here's what I want to do. That's the context setting. That's why we're having this conversation. And that's why I get really energized about this topic, because it does feel new in certain ways. And at a time when we are thinking so much about return on investment for what we are doing for students, how we're thinking about supporting our programs on campuses that are deeply engaged in civic and community work, how we're communicating the imperative of that to our students. This is the conversation I really hope we can have. So if I know I'm preaching to the choir, so you probably don't need to be convinced, but I hope I can give you some ideas for how you might have these conversations on campus. So there's just a few areas I'm going to talk about. These are all in the report, probably neatly bound a little bit more for this, but I promise to share the slides. So you have that, but let me walk you through just a little bit of what we found in this report. We started to make this case really, we've always made this case, this is what we do at AAC&U, but I think we made this case a little more clearly in our employer reports starting in 2021. And I would say this 2025 report is the best case yet, the strongest evidence we have to date about how employers view the idea that we should not be creating this false binary, that we should be talking about these things together. So, for example, we asked employers, what do you think the purpose is of higher education? What do you think higher education is meant to do? Probably not a surprise that the leading response to that was that of the responses we gave, that it was to provide a skilled and educated workforce. Large percentage that say that's very important. Look what the second one was. Help students become informed citizens. A stamp on what we think the purpose ought to be and what it is. These were actually the follow-up statements. And I don't always show this, but because it's definitely in the report, but it's just so good for this conversation in terms of how employers actually view what's happening, what they view as very important. So creating environments where students feel supported, their ability to engage in community, providing a platform, the expression of diverse ideas. This is something we're going to come back to in just a few minutes, even as we talk about skills and abilities, and fostering cross-cultural understanding. I want to train your eye as we go through this. I go through this short presentation, but maybe into our discussion, to look for these stars. These stars, again, are something that we found in 2021. I was hoping we'd find the same trend in 2023, and again, we found the same trend in 2025. And that trend is that employers under the age of 40 have significantly different, or significantly higher, I should say, estimations of skills, abilities, importance of higher ed in some important ways. But the trend effect, the story we are telling with that age gap, is that employers under the age of 40 value civic and community engaged experiences. I would also say project-based experiences at far higher rates than employers over the age of 50. We started finding it in 2021. That story has just persisted. And as our questions get better at interrogating that difference, the clearer we're getting of how true that trend difference is. And I'd be happy to chat about. So you're going to see those stars pop up a lot as we go through this particular conversation. In 2023, we asked a group of questions. My credit to our Vice President of Communications for saying, we are at an extraordinary time to be thinking about academic freedom. What do employers think about what we might phrase as academic freedom, or at least the freedom to learn, for students to be exposed, as you're seeing here, to all topics, to be at how they would look upon an institution that is not subject to government restrictions. I would look more favorably upon a degree from an institution known for respecting diverse perspectives. And we were struck that in 2023, we were finding, this is just the percent that strongly agreed with these states. If you had somewhat agree, you're well into the 80s. But this felt like a pretty strong stamp in terms of just the amount of employers that would strongly agree with these statements. We decided to re-ask the questions just 2 years later, even higher percentages. This is an effect that's even getting stronger for employers. So as you talk with faculty and staff about the ways in which ideas are communicated and the imperative to create spaces where students can talk to each other and sift through those complex ideas, we can also say that employers value those skills too. This is something that's going to keep coming up. So this is not my only data point on this, is what I'm saying. But it was a striking one that it even increased more. And we also had, as you might suspected, an age difference in that as well. So let's talk just a little bit about experiences. So that's the purpose of higher ed. So some of the experiences we have long known in our employer studies. Again, it's AAC&U. We work a lot with high impact practices. And we wanted to know, do those experiences matter to employers, and to what degree? For example, if a student if they've engaged in something like a senior capstone project, or maybe a learning community, maybe a writing intensive or a semester-long project, what is an employer more likely to hire that student? So based on employer perceptions, internship being the leading one of that, you'd maybe expect that an internship would be the coin of the realm, probably the leader by a mile. In actuality, what we find, if you just look at the much more likely to hire, look at how the leadership role in this and how we communicate what civic experiences might exist for students. And if we add just the somewhat more likely, again, we're in very high percentages of what employers think and how they might value these experiences. I know we're all living in a time when AI is sifting through a lot of resumes, but we certainly hope that maybe at the next level, that these are the kinds of experiences that are helping students stand out in the crowd. And make sure to cover up my things here. These are also places where we found significant differences between employers under the age of 40 and those over the age of 50. I think what I would love to draw your attention to in this chart is look where those stars fall. Working with people with diverse backgrounds and cultures, a research with faculty that actually tends to be often a community-based exercise, but certainly project-based at the very least, completed a senior project, and those final two, completed project on global issues and global experiences. You'll see exactly how stark these differences are, but overall, on average, in comparing putting much and somewhat likely, employers under the age of 40 are 11 percentage points higher. That gap is mostly due to the bottom two. There's such a difference between how employers under the age of 40 view and value those experiences that actually has a large accounting for what the difference is. So I often talk about skills and mindsets before I talk about experiences. I flipped it a little bit for our conversation today, because I wanted to kind of lead into a more expansive set of what skills and mindsets are. I also thought it was important for this group because if I'm in any space, if I think of the spaces I am around community and civic engagement, one of the things that comes up all the time is, how do we not just have students doing things? How do we impress upon them that they are meant to build something? They are meant to build capacities. It's not just about the doing that matters. It's about the doing for what. So it felt important to kind of highlight the experiences that so many of us share that we consider that are civic and community based, and then go into and what are the skills and essential capacities that we think are coming out of those experiences. So we've asked employers for a long time about the skills and experiences that matter to them, that stand out to them. Every time we do an employer report, it's always interesting to see what rises to the top. Like the learning outcomes are in some kind of horse race with each other. That's not at all the case. The real totality of what you're about to see in this chart is that employers strongly endorse, as you've probably seen from a lot of other places, strongly endorse broad skills and abilities. And it is not a surprise that application and knowledge to real world situations is very high here. And then adding on somewhat important, you have really, really high endorsement of all these skills. I would just draw your attention to the importance of a lot of civic skills, or what we might think of as civic skills in this, ethical judgment and decision making, for example. In our last two reports, we added this language around ability to engage in thoughtful debate. And we're struck again by how well it ranked among the kind of laundry list of things that we usually think we are building for students. And again, we are going to see at the bottom their appreciation of cultural differences and situating actions in global contexts, this really important difference in how employers are behaving. I have a slightly different star here by oral communication. It is the one place where there's a significant difference in age, and it's actually the employers over the age of 50 that value this. So I felt it important to flag that. But these bottom two have huge differences between employer, and I say that knowing as a quantitative researcher what it means to use words like that, but the pretty sizable gap between employers under the age of 40 and those over 50. In fact, when I went back through all of the differences, when you look at skills, mindsets, and experiences, actually, anytime those qualities or anytime that item in the survey contained the word diverse, cultural, or global, that was when we saw a 10 percentage point on average difference between employers under the age of 40 being higher than those over the age of 50, just when they included those words. Obviously, lots of other differences too, but that was the first time I really recognized that specific difference. So, of course, mindsets are really important. We've been asking about these for a while. I raised these up in our conversation today as a reminder that as we think about what is made to be transparent, what it is we are reinforcing for students in the curriculum and the co-curriculum, how important it is to continue to layer this idea of mindsets into, or however you want to call them, dispositions, aptitudes, affective quality. There's a lot of different words, but how important it is to lift these up, not as the fluffy things on the side, but these absolute essentials. And I think these are also important because they are the things that we think are built in those civic, community, global kinds of contexts. So for example, one example of this, the top 5 skills that were rated very important on average as very important, 62% of employers on average said these 5 things. These are our top skills that we might say. These are the top 5 mindsets that we asked about. Every bit as high, every bit viewed as every bit as important as those. We had an opportunity in this study. Again, I think this is why we are able to make our strongest case yet, that there is a false binary between civic and professional skills. We really leaned into our question asking this time around in 2025. And I want to shout out to Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, who gave us some language around this, actually looked at some of the items that we use. Our study was not funded by Arthur Vining, but they've just been doing some really great work in this area. So we looked at, for example, how do we expand the way that we think about what skills mean? And how can we ask employers very specifically about that? So we did. We asked employers, what do you think the usefulness is of constructive disagreement? That is the language we used with them in this study. For good or bad, it's the language we used. 66% said it was very useful If you add somewhat useful, you're super high on this. 2/3 of employers are saying this is a very valuable skill for students to have. We look in our study around preparedness, look at the dramatic drop in employers, the relative levels at which employers feel very confident that institutions are helping students to develop skills that would lead them to be able to constructively disagree with their peers. So this is a pretty big gap. But we look at this in all kinds of ways in the report, very specifically between levels of importance and levels of preparedness. I'm just showing you one example of how this plays out here with constructive disagreement. If this is surprising to you, if that kind of question, that kind of employer response is surprising to you, and of course there's part of me that hopes it is a little surprising, you should know this isn't the only data point that exists. The Society for Human Resource Managers, which effectively the Human Resource Professional Association, has been doing some fantastic work around civility. So they've developed what they call the Civility Index. You can access it here. I've got the link there. This is, if you go to this link, you're going to find the data points I'm about to show you. So no deep digging here, but the totality of their work and the way they've leaned into this topic is really interesting. So, for example, almost 60% of workers believe society is uncivil. They find, again, so interesting. I really love the work they're doing. 212 million workers, 212 workers report 212 million acts of incivility that was reported by workers in a recent study by SHRM. And I love this translation. An estimated $2.3 billion of lost revenue, of lost money in absenteeism and loss of productivity due to those acts of incivility or working in climates that workers find uncivil. So this, again, is not just because it's good for society. This is where we can make a real case for how economic thriving, community thriving, and personal thriving actually come together in ways that we shouldn't be separating, that we should be having much more fluid conversations about. Really encourage you to check out that work. I'm going to say, I know we're just about right out of time, and I've gone pretty fast, and I thought about whether I should put in this piece. We have been asking in the last couple employer studies about how students communicate about their skills. Things like, do you like looking at an e-portfolio as an employer? Does it matter to you if a student has a digital portfolio or personal website that reflects their work, reflects their skills, abilities, experiences? Spoiler, they do. They like that. But we've also been asking about micro-credentials. Starting in 2023, we asked a bunch of questions around micro-credentials. And it felt important to bring that piece into this conversation too, because this is an opportunity, as we have the opportunity to lift up students' skills, abilities, experiences through things like digital portfolios, we also have the ability to do that through micro-credentials. 81% of employers in this study said they would be at least somewhat valuable for making hiring decisions. About half said they'd be very valuable for doing that. We also know from our last study in 2023, we had some 70% of employers report to us that they already had developed or were planning to develop micro-credentials. So this is a space where higher education, colleges and universities can really lean into the co-design and construction of what these credentials look like in terms of not just making transparent what these skills are, but really a validation of students' effort in developing these skills and engaging in these experiences, and a signal to employers that higher education values these enough to credential them. And this gives me the opportunity, as just a kind of closing here, to flag a project that AAC&U and Campus Compact are working closely on together called the Higher Education Democracy Exchange. Bobby and I I'm just going to hazard to say wildly excited about this project. It's fully in development. This is a multifunctional platform that will deliver in the following ways. These are the kinds of things that people will be able to do. This is about higher education organizing itself around the value and imperative of advancing democracy. But I think what we've done in this opportunity is identify really timely ways in which that will happen that help to acknowledge the time we're in now, but also where we're heading and what's going to matter for civic skills and capabilities. So what does it mean to pull together ideas and resources that really are about innovation and scaling? How do we connect practitioners and the people who need those practitioners through a civic practitioners directory? We will have civic data dashboards that are basically around civic data storytelling, very much in the vein of this webinar. And we will have a civic credentials clearinghouse. We will have a place for those things to live and be acknowledged. For those micro credentials to be acknowledged and hopefully understood better of where they exist. So I have to show you this final slide because my son decided to do, that was the animation that needed to go with that slide. So that's going to end on that one. This is the report again. So with that, happy to flip back to anything, but I'm going to stop sharing so we have just a little time to chat all together. So I'll stop. And I know there's like loads of comments in the thing, and sorry for not.
You Ashley, and I want to honor too. I know that we're trying to keep these tight, so we've got approximately 12 minutes for some conversation. So there's a couple questions in Q&A. We're a decent sized audience, but I don't think too big for us still for people to put their hands up if you'd like to ask your question yourself. So I'll read something from the chat, but if you have a question or a comment to make, please feel free to go ahead and use the raise hand function and I'll get to what I can. Miranda asked early on about whether the report lists skills that employers ranked as unimportant. I think I know there was a kind of a little bit to that, Ashley, but if you could talk about that more directly.
Yes, the full scales of the response options are in the report. It was just for the magic of PowerPoint and the concision of PowerPoint that I just kind of focused on those areas. But absolutely, yes, there are definitely some that don't think they're important, but encouraging the percentages that do.
Okay, I'll go over to you, Sandra. Go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Hi, everybody. I have a quick question about the micro-credentials. Ashley, at Miami-Dade College, we're designing a Changemaker Scholar designation, which is like the ultimate, recognition for students that have really hit the mark and all of the types of experiences that we want them to have over their 2-year runway here. Any tips or words of wisdom as we think about how to flip this into a micro-credential? The college has been asking, is this going to be a badge? Is this going to be something digital that they can then self-promote with? Any thoughts on that? Anything to lead me towards so I can go do some more desk research?
Absolutely. So I'm doing some work nationally with a group called the Learning and Employment Record Accelerator Project. So learning and employment records will be the next frontier, really beyond the transcript of holders of both skills and experiences. Think of those then as the container for micro credentials. In that project, we work with the Digital Credentials Consortium, which is probably something it's something I did not know existed before I started working. This fantastic people, Kelly Lemoyne's there. So they have great work. Credential Engine has great work in doing some of this. I would say what comes up the most around micro credentials, language. What is it that you want to call the things? Is it a badge? Is it a certificate? Is it a micro credential? Perfectly reasonable, just like any other kind of thing that we create in higher education, to say, how are we defining this and what works for our campus? So find the language that works for you, that has the cachet you need it to have. Validation is key. This is, you're going to hear everything out there from micro credentials are the new Wild West because everybody can create them and put them on LinkedIn. So I think carefully about how you want it to be validated, maybe by faculty, by staff, maybe by employers. I think that's if you're at a place that has an employer advisory council because you're doing, or employer advisory board because you're doing something like guided pathways, it's a great opportunity to really think about your employer partnerships around what validation looks like. That's also going to be really important. Those are just two quick thoughts, but please, happy, send me a note. Sandra, we can talk more.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sandra, it's great to see you on here, by the way. It's been too long. Two comments on that too, to add to it. One is at the very end, Ashley mentioned TEDx. One of the kind of key functional areas that we are doing in HEDx is really looking at this credential landscape around civic and democratic engagement work. I think we're both looking at just a better inventory across the country around them, but also then all the things that Ashley was pointing to that are around the kind of critical supports that we can give. The second is I quickly tried to scan the participant list. I apologize for the background if that's really loud, like it seems to me with two 8-year-olds in the kitchen. But I quickly tried to scan the participant list to see if anybody from the Truckin is our R1 network at Campus Compact. We have within Truckin, we have an affinity group that's focused on this question of credentials, certificate programs, and distinctions. They are actually building out an inventory that they're starting again with R1s, but we've already talked really early stage. This is, we know, of concern across the entire network to really get clear about how we can support all of Compact in this work. So Sandra, so many people are thinking about it. So just know that topic is something we're richly focused on at Compact, and we're going to be coming back to you with more too. And there's already some good stuff. There's going to be some stuff at Compact 26 in this space too for those that are joining us there.
Thank you.
Penelope.
Hi, good morning. My name is Penelope. I direct the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Washington and have just recently joined, about a year in, the University of Washington's work, the Civic Health Initiative here on our campus. And one of the things that's really transformed my thinking is a lot of the teaching we do involves getting students to debate, right, and constructively disagree. But when you think about civic health, what we really need students to be able to do is to deliberate and weigh trade-offs, and encounter situations where there isn't a single solution, and they're kind of weighing competing goods, right? And I'm wondering whether or not the data shows anything about employers understanding that importance. I think debate is such a kind of conventional way to think about discussion. Anyway, I'm not sure what I'm asking.
Well, what I hear you asking is like the most helpful of nudges, which is like, how do we just get more sophisticated in talking to employers about the things that we value in higher ed and hope translate into post-secondary success broadly, but certainly career success. So I think I think each time we get a little, I would say even just a little bolder with our work and how we ask these questions, we get a little more sophisticated in what it is we actually want to know about. And I agree, and frankly, Penelope, as you frame that, I thought I'm a sociologist by training, and kind of one of the key aspects of micro interactions and micro sociology is actually bargaining and negotiation. I mean, it's like a bedrock of how you actually function in groups. So it's power, and there are a bunch of things in there. And so that's actually part of what I heard is how we both. So I'll use that as a way that we actually frame some of the work that we do and the importance of civic skills as very connected to our disciplinary backgrounds, regardless of what those are. But it's also a really good nudge to think about how we get more sophisticated with what we're talking about to employers. A quick example of that is even though at AAC&U we have long cared about things like flourishing. I don't know, we would have used that word, 100 years ago, but even, like in 2005, when we did our very first employer report, we were having very different conversations around what student well-being meant. And I know, in talking to the people who did those early reports, there was a belief that we could not ask questions about those kinds of things because employers wouldn't know what we were talking about. And this is where we are some 20 years later to actually be asking some really, I think, pretty nuanced questions, certainly with a much longer list of what those mindsets and aptitudes might look like. And we're finding great things and really important endorsements of what we can deliver. So we'll get better. But it's really helpful to have these exchanges and know what you all are working on so that we can ask about it too.
Awesome. Anybody else have a question they want to ask? I think something on my mind, Ashley, is, the kind of translation of this. And I do want to name, there was another question up here that I think got answered. I'm losing track of all the things. Peeler asked about any insight related to how employers are evaluating and recognizing these skills and mindsets. I think you talked a little bit about that in your presentation. But I think that connects to a question I was going to close with, actually. It's just like, where do you see this going from here? Like, it's exciting to see these kind of data points elevate. It's another to think about, like, what does this mean? How can we use this to influence, I think, the direction of higher education of prioritizing this work? So just from your vantage point, I know we're fresh off of the AAC&U meeting where there was just a healthy conversation around the public purposes and rebuilding trust. If you have any kind of thoughts about what you think might be the next sort of iteration of how this kind of comes to life or gets put to use.
What I so hope in how we talk about career readiness, workforce engagement, workforce skills, work-based learning now, right, as this whole kind of separate sort of pedagogy, that we give ourselves the space to be a whole lot more nuanced in how we talk about what occupations mean. What is the return on investment for a career? Because I think we all know on this screen that it's not just about the money. And yet we talk about what purpose and fulfillment is in really blunt ways. So our ability to communicate with students that finding purpose and meaning in what you do is a substantial variable in getting you down the road to an active and viable professional life, right? So just finding the words and the ways to make that far more nuanced for students, far more nuanced for faculty who consistently say it's not my job to get students a job. And to which I respond, it is our job to empower students to believe they can have any job they want. And a healthy dose of that understanding is about thinking about what fulfills you, what will bring you meaning. What is it? What's the kind of change you want to activate in the world? And I'll end with this, which is my hypothesis about why we're seeing that age gap difference. Why we saw it early, and I had a hunch then, and I feel emboldened now to be able to say I think we're seeing a true generational shift in what employment looks like. It is a new time for corporate social responsibility in our organizations. It's why we're seeing, places, corporations get behind kind of civic efforts. And we know that we are working with a generation, multiple now generations of students who will vote with their dollars. They care about where their money's going. They care about what the cause is. And they're actualizing that. So I think this real generational shift in how hiring is being done and what is being looked for is real. And it'll take us to keep up with that mindset shift about what that means. But I think it's pretty exciting for all of us.
Okay, I want to close there. Thank you, Ashley. I do want to say, I see some friends on here, our dear friends.
There's a lot of friends on here. Hi,
yeah,
friends.
A lot of friends and a lot of friends who are at institutions, and a surprise that you're able to be here, and just thankful from Minneapolis. And I just want to know, I know we're all, as we all think about the difficultness of the work and the really challenging environment and doing civic and community engagement in such challenging circumstances is on all of our minds. So best take care of yourselves, take care of each other. This is such important work, and I hope you all are able to have a good and peaceful weekend. I did put a shout out to you, Sean. You're like right here on the screen. Sean's series that he's doing on Pathways of Social Impact is such a great follow through with much of what Ashley just talked about. So if you're not attending those sessions, I highly encourage you to do so. They are free and accessible, and there's several sessions coming up, including February 11th. So see you all soon. Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.